Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. It's time for another episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll be reading Chapter 15 of Janis, Her Life in Music. Chapter 15 is called Rock Star Born on 2nd Avenue. Right off the bat we have a quote from Janis. What we've had to do is learn how to control success, put it in perspective, and not lose the essence of what we're doing, the music. Now, let's get started. Working with the most famous music manager in America and about to sign with the world's top record label brought Janis as much anxiety as it did joy. Could she live up to the promise she engineered and the accolades she received? Could she do so while tethered to less talented musicians whom she still loved like brothers? As her position of power within the band had increased, the family of equals started to come apart. With the new record to cut and an East Coast tour looming, Janis intended to work harder than ever. One of her most beloved bandmates, and perhaps not coincidentally, the man who introduced her to heroin, James Gurley, did not share this determination. Before leaving for New York City in February, the group added new material to its repertoire. Jefferson Airplane's bassist Jack Cassidy, an avid R&B fan, brought Big Brother a song that would be its commercial breakthrough, Piece of My Heart, written by Jerry Ragavoy, and Burt Burns had been recorded by Irma Franklin, sister of Aretha. Under the radar on pop radio, it had just debuted on the R&B chart in November, rising to number 10. When Cassidy heard Franklin's record, slow and jazzy vocals, backed primarily by keyboards and sax, he imagined Janis's voice on the retching ballad. Irma's an alto, not a soprano like Aretha, so she had a much huskier vocal presentation, Cassidy observed. Peter Albin came over to visit, and we'd listen to records, and I'd show him stuff on the bass. I said, this would be the perfect song for Janis. I played it for him and gave him the 45, and he took it to Janis. It was perfect for her kind of excitement and adrenaline. We Big Brotherized it, Dave Getz said about the band's reconstruction of the song. Andrew crafted a jagged opening guitar line with Janis's beseeching, come on, segueing into her plea, didn't I make you feel? The band doubled the song's 2.5-minute length via Andrew's guitar skronk solos. Piece of My Heart showcased Janis's spectacular vocal range and diverse textures, including her stuttering repetition of words and phrases, the shotgun rat-a-tat-tat delivery of a line, and her ability to suddenly soar to a screaming tessitura, wrote Bowdoin College professor Tracy McMullen in an academic study of the song. A line Janis oticized, never, 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 never hear me when I cry at night, babe, and I cry all the time, took on special meaning for Janis, grieving the tragic death of Otis Redding and several bandmates on December 10th when their twin-engine Beechcraft crashed into a Wisconsin lake on the way to Madison for a show. She and Sam Andrew held their own private memorial, playing Redding's records all night at Janis's apartment. Adding to her emotional distress, Janis discovered she was pregnant. According to Linda Gravenites, Janis considered having the baby, whose father was probably that drummer for Blue Cheer, Paul Whaley, who had already moved on. But with her career ascending and her personal life in flux, Janis made the decision to terminate the pregnancy, though she felt lousy about it. Gravenites recalled, in 1967, 6 years before the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, abortion was widely illegal in the United States. It had been legalized in California, but solely for extreme cases, women who had been victims of rape or incest, whose lives were endangered by pregnancy. Mexico became Janis's alternative, a dangerous one. It turned out, and she planned a trip for the procedure following a run of shows in L.A. Big Brother had gotten off to a rocky start with its patrician road manager John Cook, whose aloof attitude and bossiness irritated the band. After complaining to Albert Grossman, the band met with Cook to discuss their difference in lifestyles, Cook recounted. I said, look, man, if you want somebody whose hair is as long as yours and who just hangs around and smokes dope all the time and carries the guitar cases, we can hire somebody to do that for $30 or $40 a week. But I have to have a certain degree of autonomy. I can't just be hanging out. Let's try this a little longer. Cook would eventually bond with the group, though he'd be nicknamed the Road Nazi and work with Janis for much of the next 3 years. Grossman was deep in negotiations with Mainstream's Bob Shade and Columbia's Clive Davis over Big Brother's contract. Davis eventually agreed to Shade's demand for $200,000 to release the band, half of which Columbia would recoup from Big Brother's royalties. Shade would receive a 2% royalty from the group's first 2 Columbia albums. Davis offered a $50,000 advance to cover the cost of its first LP for the label. At the time, most San Francisco bands were signing for a total of $20,000 to $50,000. In order to land Janis and Big Brother, Columbia was putting up $250,000, a fortune back then, with 40% of that money to a straight, non-recoupable expense. Davis would write with Anthony DeCurtis in his autobiography, "I clearly knew this was an aggressive move, and possibly unprecedented in the talent marketplace. But on the rare occasion when you're dealing with an extraordinary, if not historic artist, then you have to be bold." He expected a best-selling debut album and agreed to Grossman's choice of producer, John Simon. Born in 1941, the son of a doctor who founded Connecticut's Norwalk Symphony Orchestra, Simon was an accomplished keyboardist with perfect pitch. After attending Princeton, he trained at Columbia Records as a staff producer, scoring a pop hit in 1966 with the Paul Simon penned Red Rubber Ball by The Circle. John Simon's diverse early production work included the debut albums by Leonard Cohen, the stark seismic songs of Leonard Cohen, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, the horn-drenched jazz blues rock As Child is Father to the Man. Grossman hired Simon to produce demos for the band, which led to their being signed to Capitol Records. He was working on the band's debut, Music from Big Pink, when he first met Big Brother at Golden State Recorders in San Francisco. Not a fan of psychedelic music, Simon immediately nixed Sam Andrews' suggestion they work up a freak rock version of the Star-Spangled Banner, which, of course, Jimi Hendrix would famously do in 1969. Simon was mincing, according to Andrews. He was disapproving of everything, like we were supposed to feel privileged that he had come from the East to clean up this rough Western product. You couldn't have chosen someone more unlike Big Brother. As the stakes for the band rose, James Gurley continued his decline, drinking heavily and using heroin and downers. He had lost his primacy, and after having witnessed Jimi Hendrix's prowess, he felt insecure. Andrew took over much of the lead guitar work and contributed new material such as Flower in the Sun and Farewell Song, while Gurley's creativity shriveled. Meanwhile, the media focus on Janis intensified. James suffered the most as she ascended, Dave Getz observed. He pulled back and started self-destructing, getting really almost dysfunctional. In mid-January 1968, an incapacitated Gurley nearly fell off the stage at the Golden Bear while Grossman, visiting from New York, watched. Afterward, their new manager called an impromptu Big Brother meeting without Gurley and suggested they replace the guitarist and give him $10,000 and a 6-month lead to clean up. The band immediately vetoed the idea with cries of, "We're a band! He's an important member! We can't do this without him!" The others never confronted Gurley, according to Getz. Everyone tried to avoid it, deny it, look the other way. Janis and Sam Andrew were dabbling in heroin too, like dilatanes, said Andrew, but kept it hidden after hours. "We took heroin because we thought you were supposed to. That's what Charlie Parker did, all these greats," he recounted. "It had this mystique, like the Holy Communion about it. It's like a warm bath on the inside." Janis had devoured Lady Sings the Blues, Billie Holiday's 1956 autobiography, which detailed the addiction that would contribute to the singer's death 3 years later at the age of 44. According to Linda Gravenites, Janis romanticized shooting smack, seeing it as a mark of authenticity, as if it took a hole in her arm to express a hole in her soul. Janis spent her 25th birthday on stage at the Kaleidoscope Club in Los Angeles and was feted by her entourage. Cook arranged for champagne and a birthday cake, and the club owners covered the stage in 3 dozen red roses. 4 dozen more arrived from the band and friends, including Peter Tork. She was thrilled. Soon after, Janis sneaked away to Mexico for her abortion. She returned in time for another Los Angeles performance, but she was hemorrhaged and racked with pain. Booking agent Todd Schiffman told the band members they could cancel, citing problems with the club's sound system as an excuse. But Janis rallied. "I couldn't believe it," Schiffman told writer Alice Eccles. "She put on an hour show, and you wouldn't have known she was sick. I couldn't believe my eyes." That tells us what kind of dedication and craziness she had. Back in San Francisco, Janis took time to recuperate from the ordeal. On January 31st, she wrote the Joplins for the first time in months and reflected on turning 25. "A quarter of a century. Oh, it's all too incredible. I never thought I'd even survive this long." She informed them that she had been ill for a week and a half, costing the band $8,000 in canceled bookings at the Fillmore. "I finally had a wonderful rest. I feel so nice and calm now. The first time off I've had in months. Very fun. This was the first time I've ever been stay at home, preferably in bed sick since I was away from home. I didn't really realize it until one afternoon, lying in bed drinking a beer. I suddenly flashed on the fact that lying in bed drinking a beer is the way to be sick. People sent me flowers, 3 vases full, and very many charming young men came to call. Linda and I had a fine time." Her mother had sent a clipping about Aretha Franklin, a year Janis's senior, who had broken through in 1967, redefining soul music with her magnificent "I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You" and "Respect." Janis worshipped Franklin's voice. She is by far and away the best thing in music right now, and aspired to sing with that kind of power. Beginning to see herself as approaching the great Franklin's league, Janis wrote the Joplins that Rolling Stone, which launched in San Francisco in November 1967, called me possibly the best female voice of her generation, but I suppose Franklin and I are different generations. About to record for Columbia, Franklin's label before she signed to Atlantic, said Janis, should certainly test our mettle. In the same letter, Janis, no doubt emphasizing with her big brother Mike, a fledgling artist, gave him exactly the kind of open-hearted praise and encouragement she herself perpetually craved. "Your poster was groovy, and really, good luck with your light show. Sounds like a great idea. If you need any advice, write, because I know lots of people that do them. Some of them, the originators of the whole thing. Do you plan to start with liquid projections? They're the best because they can reflect the mood of the music and keep the tempo. If you can get this and incorporate slides with it, you'll really have something. You and your friends should get the equipment and rehearse with records. Again, good luck. It's a good idea." Janis would continue to send loving messages to her brother, whose endeavors starting an underground paper clearly had been motivated by the San Francisco trip, saying in one note, "Honey, just congratulations and pride and all the love I have for your work." In a gape, particularly the poem, "Oh, so fine. I have it on my wall." The second week in February 1968, Janis, in a white puffball hat and big brother bundled in coats, at last flew into New York City with John Cook, Dave Richards, and Mark Bronstein. They set up camp at the venerably funky Chelsea Hotel on West 23rd Street. Janis wrote the Joplins of her famous literary-type intellectual hotel, where Dylan Thomas and Brendan Bahan had lived. The Spanish restaurant bar El Quijote, adjoining the hotel lobby, in the nearby club Max's Kansas City, would become Janis's headquarters while in New York. Max's, originally hangout for abstract expressionist painters, had a backroom where Andy Warhol, rock stars, and their coterie held court. As Big Brother walked in the first time with Albert Grossman, Country Joe's Janis blared on the jukebox. Into my life on waves of electric sound and flashing lights she came, next craned to see the creme de la creme of the Heights hippie scene, or as Janis labeled her contingent, a sloppy group of street freaks. Max's waitress commented, "They all seem so happy compared to everyone in New York." Janis and Big Brother would find Manhattan uptight in contrast to laid-back San Francisco. "The city made us all crazy," Janis said a few weeks later. "It was dividing the unity of the band." At Grossman's offices in a townhouse on East 55th Street, Janis and Big Brother met Myra Friedman, who was newly hired to handle their publicity. A 35-year-old classical music major from St. Louis, Friedman had previously worked in public relations at Columbia Records. She was dazzled by Janis, describing her as grand, raw, powerful, simply bedrocked in defiance and sexuality. Friedman would evolve into another Dorothy Joplin, scolding Janis for her misbehavior while caring for her deeply, and Janis would embrace another surrogate mother. Janis felt at home in Grossman's inner sanctum, a somber room, sort of a mausoleum, wherein lay queer and ominous secrets, its dark quietness a reflection of his personality, in Friedman's words. After an extended hug, Janis held on to Grossman's every word, though there weren't many. Like her father, Grossman radiated a sharp intelligence and a shrewd cynicism, usually saying less than anyone else in the room. Grossman had set up a rehearsal space for Big Brother at a downtown loft to prepare for its East Coast debut at the University of Pennsylvania's Palliser Gym on Friday, February 16th, to be followed the next night by its New York premiere at the Anderson Theater, an old Yiddish theater at 66 Second Avenue that had recently turned into a low-rent rock venue. Big Brother headlined two shows, at 8 and 11 with B.B. King opening. Janis was anxious during sound check, and Operations Director John Morris tried to calm her nerves. It had been 8 months since her triumph at Monterey, and though she had gotten plenty of press since then, Janis still had to prove herself in New York City. With the Joshua White show pulsating behind them, Big Brother kicked off the set with Janis's vocal fireworks on Catch Me Daddy, the band jumping in with a loud roar. The audience went nuts as Big Brother ripped through Magic of Love, Brownsville, and Light is Faster Than Sound. She tore the place apart, Morris recalled decades later. I've done about 400 concerts in my life and probably seen 800, and that would have to rank with the top 2 or 3 of all of them. Snapping photos, 26-year-old Elliot Landy was a fledgling photographer who had shot primarily for an underground Boston paper. He was floored. What a gorgeous lady to photograph. I'd never seen anyone like Janis. She was so fearless, brave. She put it all out there. Also in the audience was recording engineer Elliot Mazer, another Grossman client, and Columbia staff engineer Fred Catiro, both of whom had been prepped in advance by an absent John Simon about the lack of musicality and untogetherness of the band, according to Mazer. But Catiro and Mazer found Big Brother's performance exciting, particularly Janis's powerful voice. Afterward, the backstage filled with musicians and journalists, including Richard Goldstein and Linda Eastman, a photographer friend of Sam Andrews who had shot the Rolling Stones and would eventually marry Paul McCartney. Goldstein wrote an exuberant review for the following week's Village Voice, and a few months later, in Vogue, he described Janis as staggering. And she assaults the song with her eyes, her hips, and her hair. She defies key, shrieking over one line, sputtering over the next, and clutching the knees of a final stanza, begging it not to leave. Goldstein was personally taken with Janis, and one night, after Blintz's at Raynard's Deli, he walked her to the Chelsea and enjoyed a goodnight kiss. Robert Shelton, the New York Times critic, whose 1961 review of a Bob Dylan gig led to Dylan's recording contract with Columbia, wrote a piece that ran with the headline, "Rockstar Born on 2nd Avenue." There you have it, that's where the title of the chapter came from. Illustrated with Janis's photo, the rest of the band cropped from the picture. As fine as the whole evening was, it belonged mostly to sparky, spunky Miss Joplin, Sheldon said. There are just few voices of such power, flexibility, and virtuosity in pop music anywhere. Occasionally, Miss Joplin appeared to be hitting 2 harmonizing notes at once. Her voice shouted with ecstasy or anger one minute, trailed off into coquettish curlicues the next. It glided from soprano highs to chesty alto lows. In an unaccompanied section of Love is Like a Ball and Chain, Miss Joplin went on a flight that alternatively suggested a violin cadenza in the climax of a flamenco session. In Light is Faster Than Sound and Down on Me, she unleashed more energy than most singers bring to a whole program. On Monday, after scooping up a stack of the New York Times, Janis and the guys headed to Black Rock, the formidable skyscraper on 6th Avenue and 53rd Street that housed CBS and Columbia Records. Grossman, who Janis had jokingly propositioned post-gig on Saturday night, "Albert, I'm so happy I want to you," called Clive Davis to let him know that Janis wanted to ball him, too, to seal the deal. Davis politely declined. After touring the offices and meeting Bob Cato, the art director who would design the album cover, Big Brother proceeded to the 26th floor to sign the contract with Davis. It's hazy in everyone's memory, but at some point, James Gurley either stripped naked to change clothes for the press party that night, or was nude while seated at the conference table. In Davis's telling, he had just been explaining how informal the label could be. when he realized the shirtless girlie seated at the table was also pantless. Janis saw how taken aback I was and laughed, Davis recalled in the soundtrack of my life. Well, she said with a twinkle, this is how informal we are. At the packed party that night at Parasis, My Love, a Greek restaurant on 57th Street, the band got drunk while surrounded by journalists and cognoscenti attracted by that day's Times reviews. Janis was the toast of the town. The next day she wrote a rapturous letter to Linda Gravenites. Look, our first New York review after our first New York performance. Too much, really wonderful. We signed with Columbia and made the big announcement, so you can tell anyone. It's official. We start recording live as soon as possible, so it all seems to be falling into place really rapidly. So far, we've really dug New York. People have been really friendly, and we've had a lot to drink. That's the key to adjusting in New York. Drink a lot, and get used to spending time in bars, and wow, we're in the right group. Janis also sent the review to the Joplins with a buoyant note. Too much, eh? So now we're in the process of taking the East Coast by storm. Also, as of yesterday afternoon, we're with Columbia. Official. Signed the contract on the 26th floor of the CBS building, met the president, had a press party, and got drunk. Am now in Albert's office, just completed an interview. From all indications, I'm going to become rich and famous. Incredible! All sorts of magazines are asking to do articles or pictures featuring me. I'm going to do every one. Wow, I'm so lucky. I just fumbled around being a mixed-up kid and young adult, and then I fell into this. And finally, it looks like something is going to work for me. Janis' self-mythologizing, emphasizing her troubled youth and downplaying her ambition and years of work to become a great singer, had begun. She quickly perfected the art of the interview, giving journalists outer quotes and feeding them exaggerated stories of tortured adolescence and accidental success. She learned quickly that she could wow them in print, as she did on stage. No woman had ever performed like her or talked like her to the press. When I'm singing, it's like an orgasm, she would tell writer Michael Thomas after a concert in Providence, Rhode Island. You can't remember it, but you remember it. At the band's first outing to Boston, a weekend gig at the psychedelic supermarket, thieves stole $5,000 worth of Big Brother's equipment from the club after the Friday night show. Cook had to scrounge up gear for their next two concerts. 4 days later, they flew to Detroit. For the planned live album, Columbia sent engineer Fred Catiro to record Big Brother's shows at the Grand Ballroom, a funky old venue similar in vibe to the Avalon. Inside the ballroom, he set up a mobile recording unit to capture their two-night stand in early March. The opening act, the fiercely political pro-to-punk hard rock band MC5, Motor City 5, unleashed a roaring set that undermined Big Brother's own attack. Intimidated and likely tired, Big Brother had an off night, hitting more bad notes than usual, missing cues, and failing to connect. Quite the opposite from their New York triumph. The grand audience's lackluster response defeated the whole purpose of recording live, where crowd feedback can inspire a band to new heights, even mass mistakes. After the set, Janis stopped by the control booth to hear a playback. Catiro recalled playing her the tape, to which Janis responded with, "Oh!" spilled her drink, and then abruptly stormed off. Next night's gig wasn't much better, though. Catiro recalled her singing like you never heard, and the band playing okay. Later, sitting disconsolately with Catiro at a bar, Janis gulped 5 drinks in a row. When Gurley stood up from his bar stool, a packet of heroin fell from his pocket. So far on this first trip east, Janis, obeying another Grossman ultimatum, refrained from musing. She wrote Linda Gravenites about a big lecture, coupled with an implied threat from Albert about smack. No more or he drops us. Another letter confirmed. So far at least, I've put down smack. Though she had continued to chip in San Francisco, she had not yet developed a habit. And knowing how much was at stake during the upcoming weeks of recording and performing, she avoided heroin, for now. Back in New York, Big Brother gathered in Grossman's office to listen to the grand recordings. Aware of how badly they had played, the band members heard only their mistakes, out-of-tune guitars, and irregular tempos. Their annoyed manager suggested that Andrew switch to bass, with Albin, who played guitar in a few songs, taking over his leads. The band nixed that idea, but all agreed the recordings were a useless, expensive mistake. The album would have to be cut in Columbia Studios in Midtown Manhattan and Los Angeles. After the meeting, Grossman took Janis aside and told her she could do better with seasoned musicians. Years later, however, when Columbia released live tracks from the botched grand sets, influential critic Lester Bangs raved about the ragged but right version of Piece of My Heart and the rush of metal thunder on Down on Me, asserting that James Gurley's guitar solo on Ball and Chain is one of his best on record, as searing a storm of noise as on Cheap Thrills, but speeded up, directed with a kind of joyous fury. At the time, though, the disappointing recording resulted in backbiting and finger-pointing. The mood of Janis's next note to her mother on March 5th contrasted greatly with her earlier one. So very busy, and New York is very strange, competitive and ugly, and turning us all around. On my evening off, I went and saw Hello Dolly with Pearl Bailey. She's wonderful. Lots of trouble in the band, Janis wrote the next day to Linda Graven Nights, revolving around the fact that I think I'm hot, as I'm told behind the band's back by everyone from Albert on down, and the band's sloppy. I guess we'll survive. But the live recording is off now after one attempt because we were so terrible. But I was okay. God, I'm so confused. All hope for redemption on March 8th when Big Brother headlined the debut concert at the Fillmore East. Bill Graham's brand new venue, his first outside San Francisco, was located in a converted Yiddish theater at 105 2nd Avenue. The much ball-hooeyed event featured opening sets by singer-songwriter Tim Buckley and electric bluesman Albert King. Graham, in town for the opening, wanted to single out Janis's name on the theater marquee, but she insisted the Fillmore East list only the group name. Many of those who had never seen Big Brother, the concert was revelatory. When Janis started singing, I was stunned, photographer Bob Gruen recalled. She wasn't so much performing as just being, like she was possessed, just feeling and sharing that feeling. It didn't seem like an act, it was real. The only other time I've had that experience was seeing Tina Turner. A young usher, budding artist/photographer Robert Mapplethorne raced home to Brooklyn and told his roommate Patti Smith about the amazing singer he had seen. But compared with their exhilarating New York debut at the Anderson, the band's playing was off. The sound system malfunctioned and the guitars occasionally drowned out Janis's vocals, forcing her to overcompensate by screaming shrilly like a fishwife, said one male writer. Yet Nate Hentoff was intrigued enough to set up an interview with her for a major story in the Sunday New York Times. The following weekend, voice critic Richard Goldstein accompanied Big Brother to a two-night stand in Philadelphia at the Electric Factory, a huge garage-turned psychedelic playground filled with straight kids, come to gape at the hippies, he wrote. He observed Janis's pre-show jitters, how she stalks around the tiny room, her fingers drumming against the tabletop. She peers through a crack in the dressing room door and scowls. Oh, we'll never be able to get into these kids. Want to see death? Take a look out there. Yet after sipping Southern Comfort mixed in a cup of tea and snuggling backstage with a man dressed in a gorilla costume, her mood brightened. She again wowed the audience. Kids surrounded the stage, spilling over with joy at being reached, Goldstein reported. Because to hear Janis sing Ball and Chain just once is to have been laid, lovingly and well. Big Brother entered Columbia Studio B on March 19th at 7 in the evening to begin recording the album the band wanted to call Sex, Dope, and Cheap Thrills, inspired by a line on a poster for the campy 1936 anti-drug film Reefer Madness. The group slogged away until 4 in the morning, trying numerous takes of combination of the two, and then failing to capture a Catch Me Daddy. Every time she did a take, it was killer, perfect, Fred Catiro observed, but the band just wasn't there yet. They needed another 5 years at least to be considered on her level. The musicians couldn't remember their parts, he recalled, or made frequent mistakes each time they tried a new take. John Simon showed his displeasure, warning them, "You gotta get together here." To counter what the instrumentalists considered the studio's sterile environment, technicians built a mock stage to simulate a club setting. Big Brother returned the next night to cut Piece of My Heart in Summertime. Also adding to the live ambience, the members used a PA to hear what they were playing rather than wear headphones. They performed together on the stage, unlike typical sessions where individual parts were recorded in isolation booths to prevent the sound of one instrument from bleeding into another, thereby limiting a producer's ability to blend the individual tracks. James was having the hardest time, Dave Getz recalled. It was really excruciating sometimes to get a good solo out of him without screwing up or striking a bad note. At first, Janis didn't criticize Gurley or the others. She was resigned that she couldn't direct everybody, the drummer recounted. She couldn't give personal direction and say, Dave, you play this. Peter, you play this. It was out of keeping with Big Brother. No one directed anyone else. It was not the way we operated. At times, though, she lost patience, according to Katiro. She was singing her heart out. Then she stopped and walked into the control room and said, I'm not going to sing with those mother out there, and grabbed her bottle of Southern Comfort. Simon's exasperation added to the pressure, as did D.A. Penn Baker's presence in the studio. He filmed Big Brother recording Summertime for a possible documentary on Janis, although he would later drop the project. In the footage, Janis argued that a missed note on guitar wouldn't affect the overall sound, since her vocals were the main thing people wanted to hear anyway. Caught by Penn Baker's camera, Sam Andrews defended his Bach-inspired guitar parts to Simon in a bid to prove his classical training and his ability to read music. Sometimes during playbacks, Janis chatted with Gurley, distracting him from listening to them. When Penn Baker focused his lens on her, she mugged for the camera. Yet Janis was a very strong force in the studio, John Simon related later. She definitely didn't keep quiet when she had opinions, which pertained to do everything from guitar parts and tempos to sound mixes and song choices. Things still very weird here, Janis wrote Gravenites about the sessions. Recording's hard. Put down 2 tracks, combination of the 2 and Piece of My Heart. It's going to be a long haul drag, but we'll make it. During her interview with Nate Hintoff, Janis described their problems in the studio. Making this record hasn't been easy, she told him. We're not the best technicians around. We're not the kind of dispassionate professionals who can go into a studio and produce something quick and polished. We're passionate. That's all we are. And what we're trying to get on this record is what we're good at. Insisting. Getting people out of their chairs. What also makes it hard for John Simon is that we're kind of sloppy at the same time as we're happy. Last night he was trying to get something done and said, Come on, who's the head of this band? There was a pause because no one is. We vote on things, we're democratic. As criticism of her band of brothers intensified, Janis initially doubled down on her insistence they were a unit, fearing yet another fracture of family, all the while knowing in her heart it was inevitable. She was trying to be the same, Dave Getz noted, but she couldn't be the same. The band took a break from recording for a gig in Chicago, its first time back since the 1966 Mother Blues residency. At the Agora/Cheetah, the audience numbered 3,000, with the young Bob Seger's band as the opener. Much to Big Brother's displeasure, they discovered the concert ads and posters said Janis Joplin/Big Brother. They began the gig in a huff. But the minute we walked off stage after the first set, it all fell back into place, Janis said. We looked at each other like, remember me? We remembered what it was all about. That night, Janis wore one of Gravenite's sexy new creations, a gold mini dress with matching garter. When interviewed by fashion magazines Vogue and Glamour, she raved about Linda's designs. In a piece for Downbeat, Mark Wolf focused on her physical exertion and messy appearance. Her hair is unkempt. She is sweating profusely, and she breathes heavily as if she has just run the 4-minute mile. In her interview with Wolf, Janis downplayed the hard work and planning that went into her performance. Music is just about feeling things, is how she put it. What we're trying to do in our music is just get back to old time, having a good time, jumping, getting stoned, carrying on. Hey, baby, come on up here, and let's do it, out on stage. Afterward, true to her word, she took a really groovy guy, as she described him, to her hotel room. Back in New York, recording sessions resumed. One late night, Janis stepped into the Chelsea elevator with a professional-looking man with a hangdog look. 33-year-old Leonard Cohen. He would later memorialize the tryst that followed in 2 variations of his Chelsea hotel, number 1 and number 2, with number 2 featuring these lines about their sexual encounter. You were talking so brave and so sweet, giving me head on the unmade bed while limousines waited in the street. Janis's view of their encounter was less tender. The following year, during a session with acclaimed photographer Richard Avedon, while being interviewed by his assistant/writer Dune Arbus, Janis spoke about the ups and downs of her sex life. Sometimes you're with someone and you're convinced that they have something to tell you, she confided, or you want to be with them. So maybe there's nothing happening, but you keep telling yourself something's happening. You know, in communication. He's just not saying anything. He's moody or something, so you keep being there, pulling, giving, rapping, and then, all of a sudden, about 4 o'clock in the morning, you realize that this mother is just lying there. He's not bawling me. I mean, that really happened to me. Really heavy, like slam in the face it happened. Twice, Jim Morrison and Leonard Cohen. And it's strange, because they were the only two that I can think of, like prominent people, that I tried to without really liking them up front, just because I knew who they were and wanted to know them. And then they both gave me nothing. But I don't know what that means. Maybe it just means they were on a bummer. Leonard Cohen, it turned out, observed more than nothing about her. In his song's lyrics and wistful melody, composed in the months after her death, Cohen captured her wit and lifelong tortured relationship with beauty, writing, "In clenching your fists for the ones like us who are oppressed by the figures of beauty, you fixed yourself, you said, 'Well, never mind, we are ugly, but we have the music.'" Cohen later publicly named his paramour in Chelsea Hotel, though anyone who knew Janis, whose other hotel tryst included a charming Irish guitarist, a 19-year-old from the New York Street Gang School, in Janis's words, and a member of the band the Chamber Brothers, recognized her from such lines as, "You were famous, but your heart was a legend. You told me again you preferred handsome men, but for me you would make an exception." Janis had another run-in with handsome man Jim Morrison while hanging out at Steve Paul's The Scene, an insider's rock and roll club on West 46th Street where musicians jammed after hours. Hendrix was a regular, frequently playing until dawn. Around 3 o'clock one night, while Janis watched Hendrix on stage with the Chamber Brothers, Morrison drunkenly stumbled in. According to Danny Fields, then the Doors' publicist, Jim bellied his way up to the low stage, threw his arms around Jimmy's thighs, and said, "I wanna suck your..." In defense of Hendrix, Fields continued, Janis ran over to the stage, yelling, "You hole!" She banged a bottle down on Jim's head. The three of them were on the floor in a ball like little fish. Their handlers came running up and pried them apart and took them home. No stranger to violent brawls in Louisiana roadhouses, Janis shrugged off the drunken episode as just another night out. After Big Brother finally finished tracking Summertime on March 28th, Janis was in good spirits, writing Dorothy Joplin that the 3 tracks that we have down sound really good. The toast of New York still craved affirmation from her mother. "I just can't tell you how much your letters have meant to me here. So nice. Your firstborn is really doing great in the music business. Did I tell you about all my reviews? Can I tell you again? This is all so exciting to me." After a detailed, lengthy, annotated list of her voluminous press coverage, she added, "Isn't that too much?" and paraphrased a line from the 1960 televised musical Peter Pan, "I just have to crow." As in the past, Janis still attempted to connect with her mother on fashion, and now that she could afford it, home decor. Just bought $115 worth of fur, a deerskin for the wall, 5 used coats to cut up and sew back together for a huge rug, and a fantastic white alpaca rug about 3 inches thick and huge. Fantastic! I love fur and soft things. I didn't get any clothes while I was here, just some shoes. In fact, I didn't do anything except the music business. Recording gigs, interviews, and picture sessions took all of our time. Bye for now. I'll try to write again when I'm not so enamored with myself. A week before Big Brother's return to California, the group was booked on a bill with B.B. King for a residency at Generation, a hip new club in the Village. The East 8th Street venue didn't have a liquor license, yet. 2 years later, Hendrix would turn Generation into his Electric Lady Studios. Penn Baker captured Big Brother's opening night, filming a well-played version of Summertime. On April 4th, following the shocking assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis, the club became a gathering place for musicians to mourn. B.B. King sat on his guitar amp on stage and played gospel songs, according to John Cook, moving the audience to tears. The club stayed open all night, with Hendrix and bluesman Buddy Guy stopping by to play. For a more organized tribute to Dr. King, John Cook invited musicians to join Big Brother on its last night there, including Jimi Hendrix, Buddy Guy, Al Kooper, Paul Butterfield, Elvin Bishop, Richie Havens, and Joni Mitchell. By spring 1968, Big Brother had arrived. In fewer than 2 months of concerts, the band earned more than $40,000, nearly $250,000 today, and everyone got a raise. Back in California, the pace didn't let up. The day after an April 10th event at the Anaheim Convention Center, they returned to San Francisco. "We're so glad to be here with you," Janis proclaimed during the band's 3-night stint for Bill Graham, first at the Fillmore and then, to accommodate the crowds, the larger Winterland. She walked across the stage cackling maniacally and stomping her foot, which she did when she was really happy, Sam Andrew recalled. Coming home triumphant was a great time for all of us, Dave Getz reflected. For a moment, it really felt like we had gone and conquered the world. Recorded for possible use on the album, the sets documented the re-energized band in top form. The live versions have more of the pure, insane, raw energy that was our stock and trade, said Getz, which had to be toned down in the studio. Peter Albin, still sharing onstage patter with Janis, thanked the enthusiastic crowd for being patient, unlike New York audiences. Cradled in the arms of San Francisco, Janis restarted her fling with cosmic cowboy Moan Melvin, who had moved to the hip new FM rock radio station KSAN. Then at Peggy Kostura's Stinson Beach cabin, her friendship with the boutique owner evolved from platonic to sexual. They had earlier spent the night together at the Chelsea in New York, when Kostura was in town on a buying trip. As Janis and Kostura became more intimately involved, Janis introduced her to heroin, which she had taken up again. As Janis injected her the first time, she murmured, "Say goodbye to your pain," recalled Kostura, who at the time was in a long-term relationship with a physically abusive woman. "I couldn't understand Janis's affinity for heroin until this night," Kostura wrote in her memoir, "I ran into some trouble." At the time, Kostura was desperate to ease the raw, wounded feeling, and Janis was offering me, with tenderness and kindness, the solution, one she herself had been employing to ease her own pain and maybe some fears too. Kostura detailed Janis's well-kept set of works, her syringe, spoons, and purple silk scarf for tying off her arm. As Kostura herself became a junkie, the drug would bond us in yet another way, she wrote. Occasionally, the two women indulged in smack and sex in a menage a trois with Moan Melvin, who would soon marry Joan Baez's sister, Mimi Farina. Janis jokingly referred to herself, Kostura recalled, as the queen of unrequited love. Amidst all her lovers, Janis continued to yearn for the one who would give her that complete, unconditional love, pouring her anguish into her performances. "Look at all the love songs," she told Kostura. "How many are happy?" While on tour, Janis had lost her lease to the Lyon Street apartment due to her dog George, and she and Linda Gravenites moved to a larger two-bedroom place on No Street, between the Castro and the Mission districts. Perched on the hilltop, the third-floor flat featured sweeping views of No Valley. On their new kitchen wall, they hung a picture of Uncle Albert, an image of William Penn cut out from a Quaker oatmeal container, which they thought resembled Grossman. Throughout the rest of April and into May, the band performed in California, while making trips to Columbia's LA studio to finish the album. Tension returned as all five struggled to please the merciless Simon. He told Janis she sang off-key, and he particularly disapproved of the way she used identical phrasing on each vocal take, a practice she had perfected, double-tracking her vocals during the mainstream sessions. For the Columbia recording, she had rehearsed her vocals to the point that during the session she could repeat herself flawlessly, take after take. Simon argued that Janis was being inauthentic, since blues and jazz singers tend to improvise each time they sing. Janis's soon-to-be iconic and influential style, however, was the result of much thought and practice. As she explained in an interview with Nat Hintoff, "I didn't quite feel free enough with my phrasing to say I'm a jazz singer. I sing with a more demanding beat, a steady rather than a lilting beat. I don't riff over the band. I try to punctuate the rhythm with my voice." Simon, a perfectionist in the studio, appreciated aspects of Janis's talent and hard work, but he seemed not to fully realize what he was dealing with. The two simply had no chemistry. Her abrasiveness and profanity bothered him. She said, "Hey, mother!" "That's what she always called me. Never John," he later groused. When she heard Simon on keyboards during an Electric Flag session he was producing, she insisted he play barrel house piano on Turtle Blues. They attempted a live-sounding track, with Gurley and Andrew bringing a tape recorder to their favorite watering hole, Barney's Beanery, to capture the saloon's sonics. Then in the studio, John Cook, Bob Newworth, and Howard Hessman, who had moved to L.A. with fellow committee cast member Carl Gottlieb, smashed glass and whooped it up for the recording. Though most listeners were fooled and the Beanery was credited on the LP for the song's vibes, Simon scoffed at the track, calling his piano playing one of my 2 embarrassing performances on record. Big Brother finally completed the album, polishing off a torrid I Need a Man to Love, my personal favorite, and Oh Sweet Mary, a reconstructed cuckoo with new lyrics surely inspired by Janis's life in Texas, Why Is It So Hard? Breathing in the Air. During recording sessions, the band had taken up residency at Hollywood's landmark Motor Hotel on Franklin Avenue, a hip rock and roll hostelry recommended by Newworth, then working for The Doors. Its earth-stat tiki decor and shag carpeting added a kitschy touch, and management didn't frown on late-night parties. Hendrix and the Chamber Brothers often lounged around its secluded swimming pool. For each of her stays there, Janis selected room 105 near the lobby, with quick access to the pool. It would become her home away from home in L.A. While there, Janis grew closer to Newworth, who introduced her to a new circle of friends, including Michael J. Pollard. The actor had become hot property after his Oscar-nominated role as C.W. Moss in 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, and soon he was pushing for Janis to play a part in an offbeat western that never came to pass. One crazy afternoon, Janis and her entourage wound up at a party thrown by female friends of Hessman and Goldlib, caretakers for the Calabas home of crooner John Davidson. After hours of drinking, Janis engaged in yet another showdown with a wasted Jim Morrison. As she played pool and tried to ignore him, the Doors singer suddenly grabbed her by the hair and then pushed her face down onto a coffee table. Janis ran crying to the bathroom. A while later, she returned, picked up a whiskey bottle, and when Morrison staggered toward the door, she broke it over his head. The next day, according to Doors producer Paul Rothchild, Jim said, "What a great woman! She's terrific!" He was in love. He loved violence. The feud between Morrison and Janis would persist. Sometime later, as a guest on Dick Cavett's TV show, Janis exploded with laughter when Cavett lit his cigarette, saying, "Let me light your fire. That's my favorite singer," she said, dripping with sarcasm but giving no further explanation. On stage, Janis began creating a persona, an exaggerated version of herself. Privately, she asked Linda Graven nights, "What if they find out I'm only Janis?" But in public and on stage, her bravado increased. Between songs, she sometimes cracked wise, putting on a kind of Mae West meets W.C. Fields accent, irritating her bandmates. "I started noticing Janis believing all her publicity," Peter Albin recounted about the press's focus on her talent. "She was becoming a diva, partially due to the encouragement from her entourage, the clique of L.A. people. Paul Rothchild, Bobby Newworth, Michael Pollard. Janis started to become a phony, a caricature of herself." Clive Davis planned to list Janis's name above the band's on their album jacket, but Grossman, speaking for Janis, nixed the idea. The debut Columbia release had been renamed Cheap Thrills, with the label eliminating the words sex and dope. In New York, Big Brother had participated in a photo session for a proposed cover in which the band frolicked naked in bed together, excluding Albin, who wore long underwear. "We were much amused to find a Madison Avenue version of a psychedelic bedroom," Sam Andrew recalled about the set, "like something Peter Max would do, all in pink. The complete antithesis of the real thing, which would be in dark shades, if not totally black." When Janis arrived on stage, according to Andrew, she took one look and let out a whoop and a Texas cackle. "Let's trash it, boys." That added more authenticity, but Janis's bare breasts were exposed in the photos, so Columbia ruled against the concept. Big Brother turned to Janis's pal, R. Crumb, for a solution, and his bold illustrations of the album's song titles and portraits of each band member became the eye-catching cover. A collector of 1920s and 1930s blues 78s, Crumb combined his own style with the exploitative imagery of early blues or race record advertisements, including a mammy for summertime and voluptuous images of Janis with accented cleavage, nipples, and hips. For the back cover, the label chose a black and white portrait of Janis, smiling broadly, her hair flying and her legs planted in a wide stance, taken by San Francisco photographer Thomas Weir. The interior of the gatefold album sleeve featured the entire band shot by Elliot Landy, while bathed in a light show on stage at the Fillmore East. Clive Davis rejected John Simon's initial rough mixes of Cheap Thrills, so Big Brother reconvened in June with Elliot Mazer in the studio to complete the sound mixing. Simon had chosen the anarchic rush of Harry to kick off side 2, which Davis vetoed, though Crumb's illustration of the song, a bug-eyed Swami for Hare Krishna, stayed on the cover. At that point, Simon quit the project and went on tour with Taj Mahal. He told Columbia he wanted no producer credit on the LP sleeve, although he received royalties on album sales. Over the years, Simon gave various reasons for his decision. Early on, he told a reporter he was just helping the band out and that it wasn't his kind of music. Janis was among the names listed in the engineering credits on the LP sleeve. As with Big Brother's mainstream sessions, she became absorbed with the mechanics of the studio, writing her parents that the sound mixing process means setting the balances of all the instruments and voices to each other. It could be a very simple or a very complicated procedure. Mazer described Janis's involvement as incredibly on top of it. For 2 weeks, only Janis, myself, and the engineer would stay from 2 in the afternoon until 7 in the morning. I never knew an artist that worked harder. Sam Andrew recalled Janis spending 36 hours straight with Mazer on the LP's final mixing session. In the end, Cheap Thrills recreates the roar and rough-edged spontaneity of Big Brother in performance, with Janis's vocals soaring above the fray. The album's sonic wizardry included snippets of live material edited into the mix, creating the impression of a live recording. The LP opens with Bill Graham's booming announcement, 4 gentlemen and 1 great, great broad, before a studio recording of combination of the two. Many reviewers mistakenly thought the entire album was live. With the deletion of Harry, side 2 consisted of only 3 tracks, with the Live at the Fillmore Ball and Chain bringing the LP to a close. A lot of editing had to happen, but what's on Cheap Thrills is incredible, said Dave Getz. You don't hear all the torturous bits. There were some takes that were just so awful. They were painful to listen to, but somehow John Simon and all of us together, with millions of takes being edited together, got something unique. The album's rawness, captured via fastidious production techniques, set it apart from most Columbia recordings at that time. To help promote its August 1968 release, Clive Davis invited the band to play the annual CBS convention in Puerto Rico in late July. Janis spent most of her time there strolling the convention with Grossman, who clearly doted on her. The guys in Big Brother were treated like backup musicians, while Janis smoozed with the corporate execs. Equipment chief Dave Richards was so troubled by the animosity among the band members that he quit after Puerto Rico. There was no friendship anymore, he recalled. It used to be everybody kidding around, but it turned into this icy thing before every gig. The performance at the convention went well, eliciting enthusiasm from Columbia staffers, but resentment ran through the band, said Dave Getz. With such high stakes, mistakes weren't taken lightly anymore. There was a lot of blaming toward each other, too. It wasn't just Janis versus everybody else. However, any sense of conflict was absent from Janis's cheery postcard to her parents. I had to write you a card from Puerto Rico. So far, all I've seen, unfortunately, is the inside of 3 hotels and a short stretch of beach, but lots of free-run punch on Columbia. We play tonight, 7, leave tomorrow morning for Newport, but at least I'll get to see the island from the air. Performing at the Newport Folk Festival had been a long-held dream for Janis. While in the Waller Creek Boys, she had tried to find someone to hitchhike with her from Austin to Rhode Island. Known for its acoustic blues, old-timey country, bluegrass, gospel, and folk, the festival rarely booked electric bands. Dylan was famously booed when he went electric there in '65. Janis's affinity for Bessie Smith, touted in the festival program, and Grossman's longtime association with the festival helped get Big Brother on the bill, as did its increasing popularity among college students. Janis traversed the grounds, checking out the afternoon workshops. She delighted in reconnecting with Kenneth Threadgill, who was yodeling Jimmy Rogers songs and other CW numbers. Janis hugged and kissed the man she considered her first booster. She hung out with the Queskin Jug Band's Maria Mulder and attended a set by Appalachian balladeer Gene Ritchie, whom she had admired as a teen. And she managed to snag hip publicist Danny Field's gorgeous male assistant to accompany her back to her hotel room. I've been watching everybody. It's been groovy, but I've been horny to play, Janis told the audience during Big Brother's sold-out show headlining slot on Saturday, July 27th. Dressed in Linda Gravenite's latest design, a tight black mini dress with an embroidered, very low-cut bodice and mesh tights, Janis radiated excitement. The set, which was recorded, veered from wobbly to killer. The opener, their new single Piece of My Heart, sounded shaky, but they got into the groove on Summertime, the traditional cuckoo rather than the revised version. Oh Sweet Mary worked well, but combination of the two lost momentum during a long dissonant guitar jam. Big Brother finished with a dynamic Ball and Chain, the crowd of 20,000 applauding wildly. Back for an encore, Janis confessed, I've been wanting to come to this festival since I was 17 years old, and I never had the bread. That's the truth. Then, still being cheered after an emotion-drenched Down on Me, they reprised the chorus of Piece of My Heart, executed better than before. Thank you, that's all we got time for. You're so groovy, man! Janis yelled into the mic as the sound curfew brought the show to a close. Boisterous applause continued to ring out long after they ran off stage, triumphant. But for Peter Albin and Dave Guest, the lyrics to Down on Me, Everywhere I Go, They're Down on Me, really hit home when they saw their manager backstage. Wasn't it great? They asked him. Grossman frowned, saying, The rhythm section is still not up to par. Making their humiliation worse, he delivered his verdict while standing with members of the band who looked embarrassed. It was a shock, Albin recounted. Such a come-down. John Cook, who had loved the performance, gave Grossman his positive appraisal, but the manager just shook his head. In Cook's telling, Grossman never asked for his musical opinion again. A few days later, back in New York at the Chelsea Hotel, Janis called a band meeting. Whew, that's the end of chapter 15. 2 chapters to go. Those 2 are even longer, so I'll probably split those 2 chapters in half. I don't want these rock and read videos to get too long. About 1 hour is my limit. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Until then, rock on.